right, so day 6, I've read my little meditation. Again, for those of you who don't know the book, this is the book. It's Rolf Gates and Katrina Kennison, just so you know what book I'm reading out of. And you know, I'm meditating, and then I'm kind of writing down some notes so that I don't derail in these videos. So day 6, initially when I read this, I kind of felt like it didn't land. Like I was like, I don't really feel connected to this. It's kind of like, okay, yeah, whatever. So what he talks about in day 6 is, if you did what you did, you get what you got. So he talks about non-attachment, and he also talks about how renunciation of something on its own doesn't really hold any power, that there has to be practice behind that renunciation in order to continue to remove yourself from that, or, you know, stop eating the sugar, or quit talking bad about yourself, or, you know, those sorts of things. Like, you can't just like swear off something, because if you really want to swear off something, there has to be a practice that's behind that in order to stay away from said thing, if that makes sense. So after reading this little blip, it was kind of like, I kind of read it and I sat there and I'm like, this isn't really landing. But then I also kind of like sat quietly for a moment, closed my eyes, really meditated and dropped into what he was trying to say. And it kind of started to gel together for me, like kind of like on a personal level. So it says here, you can renounce bananas all you like, but if you continue to live in your banana home on your banana street, if you keep your job at the banana warehouse and hang out with all your banana gobbling friends, you'll be eating bananas before you know it. So therein lies the practice. So the first part of this would be the renunciation. Like, I'm gonna give up something, or for me, it's to give up the negative and kind of like defamating self-talk, right? I'm extremely hard on myself. I'm very type A. I tend to be a little bit of a perfectionist in regards to things of myself. You know, I've always been an A student in school, not to brag about that, but it's just, it's one thing to be an A student in school, but it's a completely other thing to like really beat yourself up if you didn't get the A. So, you know, the students that you went to school with that were always like, oh, I have perfect grades. Well, there's a lot that they kind of pay in order to get that high grade. I know, speaking for myself as an A student, you know, there was a lot of stress that came along with that. If I got a B in a class, it was like the end of the world. Now, as an adult, I've learned to kind of let part of that go, so it's not as severe, but I'm also 38 years old. It's also taken however many years as an adult to remove that mindset of, you know, there's only one way, and that is to ace the class. So I'm deviating a little. So after a few minutes of quiet sitting, what I kind of found is, you know, he kind of talks about non-attachment. So non-attachment is kind of like the greater concept for me today. And the little things that kind of bolster that non-attachment is, first of all, the renunciation, so the removal of such thing. And then, you know, the practice of always going through it and remembering that you're renunciating that thing and that you don't want that thing. So it's kind of like the renunciation and the practice are parts of non-attachment, because if we are not attached to something, technically we're renunciating it. Now, renunciating has kind of a negative connotation for me, and that's okay. But, you know, like just not being attached to this one thing, like I don't want to eat all the bananas. You know, and then the practice part is like, you know, daily mindfulness and reminding yourself that you have, oh, on Tuesday I said I wasn't going to eat any more bananas, but here I am on Thursday standing here with one in my hand. So for me, the renunciation is first kind of like admitting to myself that I need to get rid of it. And in my meditation, the thing that kind of floated to the top was the defamation of self, or the bad self-talk, the bad mind food. And, and that practice is not so much me reminding myself to stop saying that, but reminding myself to stop and pause and say to myself, oh, I'm kind of saying something negative about myself in my head right now. It's there, but how can I change what I've just said to myself in my head to something that's a little bit more positive and less negative? So I'm trying to think of an example. Okay, so for my yoga training, we have a lot of reading and we have a lot of homework to do, and while it's all necessary, to keep us on track, there's due dates. Well, the due dates aren't hard and fast because it's not something that we're being graded on. It's not like she's gonna hand us back the assignment with like a big red A or an F at the top. But the little part of me that wants to be the overachiever and be really, really hard on myself about those due dates and what's expected of me in a certain time period, that little type A part of me really wants to be hard on myself about whether or not I turn those, if it's due on the 1st, am I turning it in on the 1st? Have I gleaned everything that I needed to glean from that before the 1st, before I turn it in? So to grant myself a little bit of compassion in that way, in that if I give it to her on the 2nd, she's not going to fail me out of the course, give yourself a little bit of a break. So it's that, the renunciation of, I'm going to try to be, renunciation, I guess for me is more like a reminder, maybe not so much of I'm giving up all sugar, or not something as quite as severe, more like I'm going to be mindful about how I talk to myself, and then the practice is acknowledging that it exists, and then kind of moving through a place of what do I want to do with that, I know that it's there, so do I need to go back and even balance it out? There's that balance of life again. Balance it out by saying something that's positive, to balance out the negative, or do I want to move is the goal for myself to move to a place in life where I don't say those things about myself? So therein lies the practice. And overall, it would be the non-attachment to the achievement, or the non-attachment to the perfection that I, for some reason have concocted in my head that I have to have. So that's on a personal level. I think that we all, on a whole, experience a lot of different things that would, we wouldn't mind renunciating. Did you have to have 13 pieces of fudge at Christmas? Probably not. But that kind of stuff, I think we could all find something that we could be a little bit more mindful of not attaching to. And to kind of put it in perspective, in one of my previous blog posts, I talked about, I think it was the one before this, I actually talked about, what's happened in my life over the course of 2020 and how I struggled with depression and, that negative self-talk kind of took over, and, being semi-unemployed and not bringing in the type of money that I was bringing before, and having a little bit of financial instability, how that kind of toyed with my brain a little bit, and what negative self-talk I already lived with, it kind of got amplified over the year, but now I'm finally getting to the point where if I'm saying something to myself about myself, I shouldn't have done that, it doesn't sound like that anymore in my head. It's, I probably shouldn't have done that, but that's okay, and just move on. Whereas before I would spend all of this time beating myself up, and, and believe me, it is nowhere near, the quality of my self-talk is nowhere near where I feel it should be. Everybody has a different expectation of what goes on in their head, and what we want that to sound like, but even over a course of a year, after having been through so much spiritually, just to put it in perspective, just in the last couple of months, I really kind of feel like You know, if I find myself with the negative self-talk 10 times a month, believe me, it's more than that, but let's use a small number for for self-esteem purposes. You know, if I find myself with negative self-talk 10 times a month, you know, 5 of those times I'm like, I probably shouldn't have said that. You know, so I mean, it's not even like perfect all the time, or that it's not like a switch gets flipped and all of a sudden I'm not talking like that to myself anymore. But, you know, it's a practice. You know, I'm practicing renunciating the negative self-talk and being not attached to the greater achievement that doesn't really exist. You know, it's a construct in my head. You know, the perfectionism or the type A things in my life, those are all constructs that I have developed inside of my own head. Like, nobody gives a crap about any of that stuff. I mean, yeah, you want your parents and your friends and your family to be proud of you, but, you know, there's lots of different ways that people that love you can be proud of you. It doesn't have to be, you know, that you have a really good high-paying job and that you've gone to school and you have 1,000,000 degrees and that you're an A+ student, which are all the things that I felt were things that those were the only possibilities that anybody would be proud of anything that I did. So, you know, I also have to put it in perspective for myself about renunciating the thing, practicing the renunciating of the thing, and then ultimately achieving the non-attachment. You know, there's no like ultimate achievement. You know, it's just at some point you're like, oh, I do that. Okay. So for the rest of my life, I am literally going to practice not doing that. And that's okay, because we're all human and we all make mistakes. And just like I talked about in another blog post before this, you know, that wheel with the spokes of the paths of yoga that are rolling down this rocky road or our spiritual path, you know, just like everything else, you know, that wheel can roll forward and backward, and sometimes it'll just fall the hell over. Sometimes a spoke flies out, and, you know, I mean, nobody knows what happens in their life. And to say something like, I'm just going to practice for the rest of my life to renounce the negative self-talk so that I can be ultimately not attached to, you know, that achievement of sense of self, because there's really no achievement. It's a circular way of saying that, but, you know, I don't really believe that anything is really linear. You know, we always circle back to the beginning at some point, you know, and I have to put in perspective to myself. And again, this is another mode of renunciation practice and non-attachment. You know, I have to remind myself that life is a practice, that there's no, you know, end point. Like, we started here and slowly we're working to here. There's no end point. Like, it's not like everybody needs to be here. You know, it's circular. Everything is circular. Nothing is linear, in I believe, in my own life. So I think it's important for myself to remember that it's a practice, and that it's circular and it's not linear, and that non-attachment is not an achievement. That it's a state of mind. It's not a here, have your medal, you have achieved complete non-attachment, if that makes any sense.